What would you say if I told you that the U.S. Navy was operating coal-fired paddle wheel steamships in late 1945 through World War II? You would say you're crazy. Now, what would you say if I told you that those same coal-fired paddle-wheeled steamships were aircraft carriers? You would say, I know you're crazy. Not today. The SS See&bee was launched in 1913 as a Great Lakes luxury steamer, built by the American Shipbuilding Company at their Wyandotte, Michigan shipyard. She was operated by the Cleveland and Buffalo Transit Company, hence the name See&bee, transporting high-paying passengers around the Great Lakes, predominantly the Cleveland to Buffalo route. She was 500 feet long with a beam of 97 feet. She had a crew of about 275 and a passenger capacity of around 1,500, and you could even take your car with you. There was room for just under 100. Another ship, the SS Greater Buffalo, was launched in 1923, the Roaring Twenties as it were. Also a Great Lakes steamer and also built by the American Shipbuilding Company, this time with their Lorain, Ohio shipyard. She was operated by the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company, D&C, also transporting high-paying passengers around the Great Lakes, but predominantly the Cleveland to Detroit route. She was 536 feet long with a beam of 96 feet. She had a crew of about 300 and a passenger capacity of around 2,100, and like the See&bee, you could still take your car with you. There was room for just over 100. Both ships were designed by the renowned naval architect of the Great Lakes, Frank E. Kirby. Both ships were outfitted with 6 single-ended and 3 double-ended coal-fired Scotch boilers, powering a 3-cylinder inclined steam engine, 1 high-pressure and 2 low-pressure cylinders. The steam engine drove 2 paddle wheels, 1 on each side. The whole setup gave the See&bee and the Greater Buffalo about 12,000 horsepower each and speeds of about 18 to 19 knots. Interestingly, both ships had double rudders, 1 bow and 1 stern. Since they didn't have any prop wash impacting the stern rudder as in a normal ship, they needed a bow rudder to aid in maneuvering. Both of the steamers were built with luxury in mind. The See&bee had a mahogany lobby with a Tuscan theme where people boarded. The main dining room was aft and extended to the rear of the ship. It was paneled in mahogany and white enamel. On the starboard side was a banquet room. On the port was 2 private dining rooms. A grand staircase led to the buffet area below the main dining room and was decorated as an Old English tavern. She also had a main salon on the promenade deck that was nearly 400 feet long. The salon was divided into a bookshop, flower booths, an observation room, along with writing rooms and private parlors. When the orchestra played on the balcony, the music could be heard throughout the main salon. On the gallery deck, the ladies' drawing room was in an Italian Renaissance style. The Greater Buffalo was advertised as, quote, the last word in marine architecture, and the palatial furnishings are rich and attractive and in good taste, unquote. She featured distilled drinking water and washed in cooled air. Sounds like air conditioning to me. They even had Broadway-style shows on board. Her salon was on 2 decks with a 22-foot transportation mural painted by New York artists Franklin Paris and Frederick Wiley. The promenade deck at the stern had a smoking room with a line of windows that arched from the port all the way to the starboard side. The highest priced staterooms offered, among other things, a private bathroom, couch, and a balcony. Footlights were incorporated into the hallways and staircases so the main lights could be turned off for the passengers' sleeping comfort. The teens and 20s were the golden age of these magnificent ships. Commerce was flowing, people were spending money, and the Great Lakes steamship trade couldn't have been better. Then the economic crash of 1929 happened. The Greater Buffalo was even taken out of service from 1930 to 1935 because the passenger volume just wasn't sufficient to support operations. In 1936, she was even used as a hotel for attendees to the Republican Convention in Cleveland. During that convention, a storm hit, she broke her moorings and drifted out into the harbor, but the harbor tugs brought her back. Now fast forward to mid-1941. The U.S. Navy had only 7 fleet carriers and 1 escort carrier. Here's where one innovative Navy commander, Richard F. Whitehead, comes into the picture. He was stationed at Great Lakes Training Center, Glenview Naval Air Station, just north of Chicago. You see, Commander Whitehead saw the need for more carriers, specifically training carriers, in the event of war. He had the crazy idea that you could convert a couple of large Great Lakes passenger steamers into carriers. After all, these large ships were just sitting at dock in the Great Lakes. Why not use them? The commander's idea was given all due consideration by the Navy Bureau of Ships and ignored immediately. Then the Pearl Harbor attack of 7 December 1941 happened. Now, the commander's idea was given serious consideration by Chief of Naval Operations Ernest J. King, so much so that his idea was fast-tracked almost immediately. The see&bee was acquired from the see&bee Transit Company in March 1942. Her conversion to an aircraft carrier started the following May. The entire superstructure was removed down to the main deck in Cleveland. Then she was towed to Buffalo, where a new 550-foot wood flight deck, associated steel structure, arresting cables, a new bridge island, smokestacks rerouted aft of the bridge island, and other modifications were accomplished in the amazing time of 4 months. This was done with about 1,250 men at the shipyard working 3 shifts round the clock. However, she did not have any hangar deck, aircraft elevators, or armament. Thus was born the Wolverine. The Greater Buffalo was converted into the carrier Sable, much like her sister ship, except she had a steel flight deck and was a bit longer. She was acquired by the Navy in August 1942 and was commissioned in May 1943. Both ships had a lecture room with projector equipment, sick bay, bunk space for about 20 pilots, a mess hall, storerooms, living quarters, laundry facilities, and a walk-in refrigerator. They also had their original boiler, engine rooms, and coal bunkers. These were not oil-fired ships like the rest of the Navy had. Both ships were also built originally with extensive sprinkler systems and bottoms that were segmented into many watertight compartments, both of which served the Navy very well. Surprisingly, each carrier had about the same crew complement as when they were in civilian steamer service. The Wolverine, IX-64, started flight operations in January 1943 and was assigned to the 9th Naval District Carrier Qualification Training Unit. The Sable, IX-81, was assigned to the same unit in May 1943. All training ops occurred on Lake Michigan. Over the course of the war, the Wolverine and Sable qualified close to 18,000 pilots, a smaller number of landing signal officers, and flight deck personnel in all weather conditions. As a matter of fact, the Sable qualified a certain ensign, George H.W. Bush, in an Avenger torpedo aircraft. According to Ensign Bush, President 41, remember, that was the coldest he'd ever been. You see, the pilots were instructed to keep the canopies open on their aircraft, thereby enabling them to get out in the event of a water takeoff or landing. One of the key difficulties was that some aircraft like Hellcats and Corsairs needed around 30 knots over the deck. Each of the carriers could steam at 18 knots, which was problematic when the prevailing winds were light or calm. If the winds were low on a particular day, flight operations had to be canceled or the qualifications had to be made in the venerable SNJ trainer, which had a lower wind over the deck requirement. The Navy preferred pilots to be qualified in the type of aircraft that they would be flying in the fleet, but when the need was great and the wind not so much, they did what had to be done. Also, the flight deck was much lower to the water than a fleet carrier. In the fleet, if a pilot didn't have sufficient airspeed when he got to the end of the deck, he still had a chance to drop to wave top height, thereby building up speed in the fall and gaining altitude. Not so with the Wolverine and Sable. Another training feature these two carriers had was that they were only about 2/3 as long as a normal fleet carrier. The Navy felt that if one could master these training carriers, then they would do fine in the fleet. Another thing that could curtail flight operations was that there were too many crashed airplanes on the deck. The training day would have to stop. Since there was no hangar deck, there was nowhere else to put any inoperative airplanes. The ships were docked at Navy Pier in Chicago and took their pilots and aircraft from NAS Glenview, which was only about 20 miles north. Of the nearly 18,000 pilots that trained on Wolverine and Sable, only about 8 lost their lives in accidents. That's amazing when you consider that each pilot had to land 8 to 10 times. That would put the number of landings north of 120,000. Only about 135 to 300 aircraft were lost, but sources vary on these numbers. After the Japanese surrender, both ships were decommissioned on 7 November 1945 and struck from the Naval Vessel Register 3 weeks later. The Wolverine was sold to a scrapyard in November 1947. The Sable briefly saw light at the end of the tunnel as the Great Lakes Historical Society offered to purchase her to be used as a museum. Sadly, those plans fell through, and she too was sold to a scrapyard in July 1948. Both carriers earned the American Campaign Medal and the World War II Victory Medal.
Naval Air Cadets, 1,000 miles from the sea, learn the technique of flying with the fleet. In battle formation, they take off for their floating base of operations on one of America's Great Lakes. Formerly the world's biggest side-wheel passenger steamer, she's now the training carrier Wolverine. Student pilots land and take off from her 550 feet flight deck under conditions identical to those at sea. An inland carrier training 10,000 new Navy fighter pilots a year.
Another reason why there were so few pilots lost were the picket boats and their crews, like the one you just saw, trailing along behind the carriers. They were there day and night in all weather conditions during flight ops, ready to rescue a hapless pilot who put his airplane in Lake Michigan. Arguably, they were the unsung heroes of this whole endeavor. And what of that Navy commander, Richard F. Whitehead, whose idea was so crazy it worked? Richard F. Whitehead's Navy career included extensive duty in World Wars I and II. He was awarded numerous commendations, including the Distinguished Service Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross. He retired a Navy Vice Admiral. He served from 1912 to 1956. He reached the ripe old age of 99 and died in St. Joseph's Hospital, Chicago.
Richard F. Whitehead was exactly where he needed to be when this country needed him most. Crazy idea and all. That is why this is a bit of history you probably didn't know.